Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stepping back into the 16th century to look at what is, without a doubt, one of the most remarkable, emotionally charged, and totally tragicomedic lives in all of recorded history. We're talking about Nasiruddin Muhammad Humayun, the second emperor of the mighty Mughal Empire. Now, when we read history, we usually expect a pretty straight line, right? Triumphs, kings steadily building up their domains, expanding borders. But Humayun's life, it was an absolute roller coaster of destiny. We're talking about a story with incredible highs, devastating lows, some deep human flaws, and an irony at the end so profound you literally could not write it into a Hollywood script. Let's dive in.
Just imagine, for a second, being the absolute most powerful king in India. You've got untold wealth, vast armies, sprawling territories across the subcontinent. And then you lose it. All of it. Your throne, your empire, your military, poof, gone in the chaotic dust of a single battle. You're forced to flee across unforgiving deserts, you're nearly drowning in rivers, and you are literally reduced to begging for survival. Most people would just throw in the towel, wouldn't they? The sheer emotional devastation of losing a crown like that is almost unimaginable. But as we'll see, Humayun was definitely not most men.
Part 1. Inheriting a Fragile Empire. So Humayun is born in Kabul in 1508. He's the eldest son of Babur, the legendary founder of the Mughal Empire. And stepping into his father's impossibly large shoes in 1530 was a massive burden, largely because of who Humayun was as a person. He was brilliant, no doubt, deeply educated in Persian literature, math, astronomy, but he was also incredibly sensitive. He was kind of a poet at heart with a very fatalistic worldview. He believed heavily in destiny and astrology. He famously organized his entire court and his daily schedule according to the movements of the stars. But here's the kicker. His sensitive brilliance and this obsession with astrology clashed violently with the harsh, blood and iron realities of 16th century warfare. There was just this stark, almost fatal contrast between father and son. Babur was ruthless, he was pragmatic, and he fought tooth and nail for absolutely every single inch of his territory. Humayun, on the other hand, he was what you might call an over-generous inheritor. Right off the bat, when he takes the throne, he accepts a division of his territories among his three highly ambitious brothers. Huge mistake. On top of that, he constantly delayed crucial military actions, and he habitually forgave enemies who would just immediately turn around and betray him all over again. But his most disastrous move was completely ignoring a brilliant rising Afghan general in the east named Sher Khan, just figuring, I'll deal with him later. Which brings us to Section 2, Defeat and Desperate Exile. That delay, it would cost him everything. Because while Humayun was busy looking at the stars, Sher Khan, who would soon crown himself Sher Shah Suri, was building a totally formidable, highly disciplined army. And this kicks off a rapid, incredibly chaotic downfall. In 1539, at the Battle of Chausa, Humayun is caught completely off guard. His army is absolutely routed. The very next year, at the Battle of Kanauj, Sher Shah Suri defeats him completely. Humayun is driven entirely out of India. But amidst this terrifying flight, wandering through Rajasthana and the deserts of Sindh with a fast dwindling band of followers, a miracle happens. In 1542, his wife gives birth to a son right there in the harsh desert. That baby boy, he would grow up to be Akbar the Great. It's a staggering contrast, isn't it? Losing an entire empire, yet bringing history's greatest Mughal emperor into the world while living in absolute poverty. Actually, during that chaotic retreat at Chausa, there's this amazing story that perfectly captures who Humayun was. He desperately plunges his horse into the surging Ganges River to escape, and he nearly drowns. Out of nowhere, a humble water carrier named Nizam sees the emperor flailing and saves his life by offering him his inflated leather water skin to use as a float. Now, Humayun, in a classic display of his characteristically misplaced poetic generosity, promises the guy a reward. And when Humayun briefly gets back to his court, he actually makes this water carrier the emperor for a single day. It's a beautiful, touching story for sure, but it perfectly highlights a king who was perhaps just way too romantic for the cutthroat world he was living in. 15. That is 15 long years. That's how long Humayun spent wandering in desperate exile. He was a king without a kingdom, just moving from camp to camp in the wilderness, watching his loyal followers slowly dwindle away due to starvation, disease, and pure despair. Think about the weight of those 15 years for a second. The humiliation, the desperation. It's a remarkably heavy, crushing reality to bear. Section 3.
the Persian cultural shift. So Humayun's absolute darkest hour eventually forces him into an alliance that would forever change the cultural fabric of his empire. Seeking a lifeline, he travels way out beyond the borders of India to seek refuge at the glittering court of Shah Tahmasp of Persia. Now, the Shah's willing to help, but there's a strict catch. Humayun has to publicly convert to Shia Islam. Humayun, finally showing some hard pragmatism with his survival on the line, accepts, though most historians agree he never truly changed his personal Sunni beliefs. But the reward was immense. He gets a highly trained army of 12,000 Persian soldiers, and with this force, Humayun marches back, recaptures Kabul, and finally deals a harsh punishment to his treacherous brother, Kamran. But crucially, we have to understand this wasn't just a military transaction. When Humayun returned, he brought with him a massive influx of Persian artists, architects, poets, and scholars. This single diplomatic deal fundamentally reshaped Mughal identity. That highly distinct, beautiful synthesis of Indian and Persian culture that we instantly associate with the magnificent Mughal era today, the art, the buildings, the language of the court, all of that was directly born out of Humayun's desperate exile in Persia. Section 4. The Great Triumphant Return. Okay, so after securing his base in Afghanistan, Humayun looks back toward India, and he waits. He waits patiently for the stars and the political climate to finally align. And his fatalistic patience actually pays off. In 1545, his great nemesis, Sher Shah Suri, is killed in a freak accident, literally an explosion of his own gunpowder during a siege. Talk about destiny, right? Following his death, the Sur Empire rapidly collapses into weakness and chaos. Sensing the exact right moment, Humayun marches his highly disciplined, Persian-backed army back into India in 1555. One by one, the enemy commanders surrender. 15 years after being chased out in total disgrace, Humayun rides back into Delhi and reclaims his throne. It is truly one of the greatest, most sweeping comebacks in world history.
And finally, Section 5. Irony and Enduring Legacy.
He had finally done it. He reclaimed his destiny against all odds. But history, as you know, has a deeply melancholic sense of humor, because Humayun's second reign, it lasted barely 6 months. On January 27, 1556, Humayun is walking down the steep stone stairs of his library in Delhi, his arms totally full of his beloved books. Suddenly, he hears the mesmerizing call to prayer ring out across the city. Being a deeply pious man, he tries to step back and kneel in reverence. His foot catches in his long robes, and he tumbles down the flight of stairs. He dies from his injuries 3 days later. He was just 47. A man who survived catastrophic wars, deadly deserts, treacherous rivers, and a decade and a half of brutal exile, ultimately killed by a trip on his own library stairs. And yet, what an absolutely incredible legacy he left behind. He passed the reclaimed empire and that rich Persian cultural synthesis straight down to his son Akbar, who would of course turn it into the greatest power in the world. Perhaps his most visible legacy, though, is architectural. His grieving widow commissioned Humayun's tomb in 1570. It's a stunning UNESCO World Heritage Site today, and it was the very first great Mughal garden tomb, literally serving as the direct architectural inspiration for the Taj Mahal decades later. And despite all his military blunders, all his flaws, he was remembered fondly. His sister actually wrote in her memoirs that Humayun was a man who was always kind, which, if you think about it, is a pretty rare epitaph for a 16th century king. Humayun's story is arguably the most human in the entire Mughal dynasty. He was a deeply flawed guy who made terrible mistakes, suffered tremendously for them, but showed an unbelievable, almost quiet resilience to win it all back. So, I leave you with this. Do you feel sympathy for Humayun as a sensitive soul thrust into a brutal world? Or do you think his initial generosity and his constant delays meant he deserved to lose his throne in the first place? Think about that as you process everything we've covered today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the incredible stories of our past.